Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting. Adequate notice of this special meeting of the Kenilworth Board of Education has been provided to the Home News Tribune, the Star Ledger, the local source, on March 1st, 2022. A copy has been filed with the Kenilworth Borough Clerk, posted in the board office, the Kenilworth Borough Hall, Brearley and Harding Schools, as is provided by the Open Public Meetings Act. The purpose of this evening's meeting will be to review the technical requirements of the 2022-23 budget and adopting the tentative budget for submission to the Executive County Superintendent. If you all please stand and salute the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Do roll call. Mr. Biner? Here. Mr. David? Here. Drogan? Haberthur? Here. Jankowitz? Here. Ladati? Here. Panici? Here. Tiers? Here. Zimmerman? Here. We have quorum. Okay, good evening, everyone. Overall, not as much changed since we last discussed the budget on March 14th. The infusion of additional state aid did assist us in closing the gap and prevented the reduction of programs. Tonight, we'll be reviewing the budget and adopting it, the tentative budget for submission to the Executive County Superintendent. We will be reviewing, in addition to the budget, Mr. Arlington will be reviewing our effort in advancing our school district. I will be reviewing the budget status, banked cap, and reserves, as well as the tax levy and the impact on the tax rate. Mr. Arlington.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. I'm really excited about tonight's presentation and the spending blueprint for next school year. Around budgeting, we often talk about what we predict and what we hope our spending will achieve. While we do the same tonight, I also want to look back across the last several budgets and share the outputs we've achieved due to thinking of prior budgets as commitments to a variety of teaching and learning inputs. We regularly engage in this process by taking feedback from parents, students, teachers, leaders, and board members, and holding that feedback up against achievement measures. Through our priority budgeting, here's what we've achieved over the past few years in the face of a pandemic. We've added instructional personnel via a tech facilitator and interventions coordinator to move away from one and done professional development and instead provide boots on the ground support to teachers and in turn students. Partially because of the pandemic, we saw and continue to see an increase in social, emotional, and mental health needs. We've partnered with Rutgers Universal Behavioral Healthcare and Tri-County to support those needs in innovative ways. We've also addressed students' varied learning needs and built successful and sustainable alternate ed programs, which I hope eventually become a school model for us, one where the curriculum doesn't drive the child, but rather the child is the curriculum. In curriculum and instruction, we're engaged in enhancing our future-ready resources and practices even before the pandemic, and the pandemic proved we were on the right track. We've achieved curricular consistency in the two main content areas, ELA and math, and provided support to these areas and others with more local funds for professional development than we've seen in this district in a long time. I think it's kind of lazy, actually, to approach or to claim school districts fulfill their financial due diligence by insisting on zero-based budgeting. Yes, of course, let's treat that as a given, but that's not enough. A school district's vision for achievement and progress must drive the spending that budgets prioritize. Over the last few years, I've looked to introduce us to budget goals as one way to do that. This year is no different. We've foregrounded spending that promulgates our big district and school goals, prioritizes spending, and continues to propel us toward future-ready teaching and learning. Spending that maintains and where possible even increases access and opportunities for kids, including social, emotional, and mental health. Of course, knowing that we have an eye on a future referendum was also a strong consideration that shaped this budget and its tax impact. With these goals as the frame, if approved, This budget addresses additional instructional support from an instructional coach. It adds a world language ELL teacher to reduce class sizes in Burley's world language department and addresses the growing English language learning population. While we'll continue to meet kids' mental health needs through a continued partnership with Rutgers UBHC, we'll also look to take back in-house some of the counseling support from a student assistance counselor, who will also help coordinate across grade levels some of our social emotional programming and interventions. In the curriculum and instruction area, after having laid a pretty good foundation this year for the need for data-driven instruction, we'll transition away from MAP and Study Island as assessment systems and tools, and towards Renaissance and Freckle to get better student performance data, and in turn use this data to better drive instruction. We remain committed to making our electives and courses more current and up to date. With that in mind, we'll be adding esports, which is gaming. We'll also be adding a space for digital production and a commitment to job coaching and life skills for specific populations. As your chief school administrator over the last few years, I felt the pressure of using the budget as one of many tools to catch us up in many different areas: curriculum, instruction, assessment, PD, program consistency, and innovation. But for the first time, honestly, I feel like so many of the components of this year's budget actually help advance us from the pack to do more than catch us up, but rather to help us lead the pack. And I'm really excited about that. So I'm happy to turn it over to Vince to get more logistical and technical information about this year's budget.
Thank you, Mr. Arlington. I'm pleased to be able to present this evening to you the budget. The multiple committees that have reviewed this budget, hours and hours have been spent putting it together. And I think we've overcome some significant challenges in putting the budget together. At our March 14th meeting, we discussed some of the concerns and the challenges that this budget had while we were putting it together. Every year we face challenges when we put a budget together. However, this year was definitely unique from a budgetary perspective. The issues were more complex and more difficult to overcome. Every time you seem to go over one hurdle, you got to another. So some of those challenges that we had, we talked about already, but just want to quickly go over them again. We had some insurance challenges in the property casualty area and workers' compensation. As Mr. Arlington said, we're still addressing those social emotional learning needs of students due to COVID and learning loss due to COVID. Professional technical services are expanding to include job coaching for students. We have some additional out-of-district placements that for special education students that came up, and then additional Social Security costs and pension costs for some of our paraprofessional aides, and our staffing also is a challenge. And then just generally, inflation at almost 8% versus a 2% budget cap, how does that work? So that's a challenge in itself. Energy costs, you're all seeing that at home. The impact of oil prices are having an impact on us as well. And how that will affect us next year is truly unknown. Shipping costs, supply chain costs, transportation for those special education, all those route costs have not only been affected by the fuel costs that are increasing, but also because of driver shortages for COVID. So all those obstacles we had to overcome, in addition to trying to deal with our bank cap and how that will affect us in the future. As we discussed a couple weeks ago, this is a picture of our expenditures. We also discussed that this decrease from year to year could be a little bit deceiving, that it's a negative, almost 1% decrease in the overall expenditures. Gives the impression that we actually cut programs. In reality, we didn't. This is a reflection that is rather simply an accounting procedure that requires the current budget be adjusted for the prior year encumbrances, as well as the fact that The Fund 20 account was significantly reduced because the 2021-2022 budget, which is our current year budget, included $1.1 million in construction projects, but the projected budget only includes $150,000. So, a better way of looking at this is to look at the expenditures and compare them without the prior year adjustments. This is essentially how the Finance Committee reviews the budgets. When they take a look at the detail behind the budgets, they want to see what was budgeted last year and what was budgeted this year. None of those little accounting techniques that change the adjusted figures. And it's a better way to compare them without those prior year adjustments, for comparative purposes at least. For accounting purposes, it's a different story. Since the original budget that we reviewed was submitted to us in January, Phase 1 budgets were reduced by almost $1.2 million. That means that we took out of the budgets $1.2 million worth of stuff, services, supplies, furniture that the administrators requested. There's still an increase there, but not as much as they wanted. But we feel that we are providing them with what they need to get the job done next year. In addition, in Phase 2, the original request included 7 additional positions in addition to the ones that Mr. Arlington just spoke about, the SAC, the world language teacher, and some additional aides. The administration felt we needed 7 additional positions. Those positions, unfortunately, could not make the cut and get into the budget. And then finally, the school business administrator documentation. We already talked about some of those challenges of the insurances and the transportation, the out-district placement, and the energy savings. So all in all, if you look at it from this perspective, the budget is up 3%. We always talk, we spend a lot of time on Phase 1. Don't we, finance people? We spend a lot of time on Phase 1, but it's really it's less than 4% of the entire budget. And the reason why we spend a lot of time on it is 2 reasons. You get a good understanding of what's going on in the academic program by looking at what we're doing, what services we're providing, and what supplies the teachers are asking for and the administrators are asking for. But it is also really one of the only opportunities that you have to cut the budget. It's very hard to cut things like staffing and utilities and insurances. It's almost impossible. When I do my public hearing, I talk about discretionary versus non-discretionary funds and how it's broken up, and you can see how it's getting more and more difficult that non-discretionary is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So what do? How did we cut the budget to where we needed to get it and still be able to present it to you this evening? In an effort to reduce it, we combed the various phases to determine if one-time cost items could be removed from the future budget and purchased with the current budget. To assist this strategy, effective March 1st, we essentially froze all spending of discretionary accounts. Items on this list here will be purchased this year were removed from next year's budget and will be purchased this year with this year's funds. That's one method that we use to reduce the budget, and the total there is $115,000. Another area that we looked at was at the direction of the Finance and Facility Committee, proposed using ESSER funds, which is the federal grant elementary secondary school emergency relief fund. Proposed using those funds to further close the budget gap that we had. We reviewed the future budget once again to determine which purchases and services could be offset by ESSER 3. We're in ESSER 3 now. A portion of the grant will be used for one-time equipment purchases, such as furniture, technology boards, esports, and makerspace programs, and the digital sound engineering program that Mr. Arlington spoke to in his discussion earlier. Another proposed expenditures include summer enrichment and tutoring programs to offset the COVID learning loss, professional services such as the mental health support with Rutgers, and student job coaching, along with a variety of professional development opportunities for our instructional staff. We do, as a committee and as a school business administrator and administration, remain concerned with offsetting some of these recurring operating costs with grant funds. Specifically, $124,000 for the mental health and $120,000 for the student job coaching are concerns moving forward. These programs are desperately needed. The funding is available for the next 2 years through this grant, and 2025 is a long way away, and hopefully alternatives will be found to address these needs by the 2024-2025 school year, and accommodations can be made to provide those beyond the 2 years within this grant. So here's a look at the revenues that we reviewed last week. Several items to note include an increase in state aid of $786,000, a reduction of the withdrawal of capital outlay, which is reflective of the reduction of the construction projects, and a larger than normal desirable tax increase, a tax levy increase at 2.83%, a little under $600,000. This is the adjusted pre-budget tax levy calculation. I typically don't go over this calculation. This is probably the first time you've ever seen it, because it's pretty basic. It's one of the starting points for how you develop the tax levy cap. But this year there was a twist that the state put in there. As you're aware, the cap is the amount the district can raise in local taxes. The cap is on the tax levy, but not on the entire budget. The twist is in line B, PL 220, Chapter 44, Adjustments, Health Benefits Savings, a deduction of $44,331. This is essentially a penalty because according to the calculation, the district saved money when Chapter 44 was implemented. We all know that that is not factually true by the analysis that we provided. And in reality, the transition from Chapter 78 to Chapter 44 cost the district money. We are currently challenging this deduction because the health benefit savings we realized had nothing to do with Chapter 44, but rather a reduction to our premiums and other mitigating factors. In your packet this evening is the supporting documentation that I did submit to the Department of Education for them to hopefully reverse this deduction. As the budget currently stands, the reversal of this deduction will not really be needed, but it's an argument that I want to continue to pursue to demonstrate that circumstances happen that the legislation did not consider in their simplistic formula. This will hopefully put us in a better position in the future that if we actually do need to rely on the adjustment, we have an argument to be made that there is a reason why these things happen, not only simply the transition from Chapter 78 to Chapter 44 and using their simplistic math. Talk about the tax levy cap. Here you can see that the figure from the last page, right down here at the bottom there, is carried over to this page for this calculation. And then there's a whole series of adjustments that can be made. Unfortunately, we're not eligible for any of those adjustments, so we are using, the only adjustment we are eligible to use is the use of bank cap. So we're projecting the use of $221,068 of banked cap to get our final tax levy at $21,665,785. So let's talk a little bit about banked cap and what it is. Bank cap is a method to allow a school district that has not granted approval to exceed the tax levy cap by a separate proposal to bank the unused tax levy for use in any of the next 3 succeeding budget years. In accordance with code, a district can request use of bank cap only after it has fully exhausted all the eligible statutory authority in the budget year. So those are all those B, C, D, E, F, G items. If you recall from the previous slide, we were using the $221,000, which is right there. Please note that we have not generated any banked cap in the past 3 budget cycles. So that's a concern to us when we look at this long range. Short of a monumental shift in how the state aid is distributed, something crazy with our ratables, I do not anticipate that we'll be able to generate much bank cap for this foreseeable future. In addition, we have $273,788 of expiring cap this year. I've included in your packet an article about Westfield School District's cap challenges, which is resulting in a reduction of staff and programmings. Take a look at it, not tonight, when you have a chance. It's very informative. It's what can happen in the future if we don't pay attention to these things. Not to say that they didn't, they had other obstacles that they had to overcome. The restrictive budget cap is something has to be done in the state. The 2% did make sense at one point, but it's becoming a very difficult challenge for school districts to overcome. So the important takeaway here is that bank cap isn't real money, but it's rather the district's authority to raise taxes above the initial tax levy calculation. It shouldn't be confused with the next items that we're going to review, which is free balance and surplus and recapitulation of balances, which is real money. So there are several categories of balances that make up a recapitulation of balances. Each category has a very specific requirement of how they can be spent and used and how they are accumulated and what the maximum levels are. The first one I want to review is undesignated free balance. Most of us call that surplus. Our current proposal calls for appropriating $450,000 to reduce the tax levy, and this is pure tax reduction. You're taking basically $450,000 from your savings account and putting it to offset your expenditures for the next school year. The next one is capital reserve. We will be appropriating $150,000 for that pole barn storage facility that we talked about in several of our committees meetings, and the reserve the remainder will assist us in our referendum discussions and financing. A maintenance reserve, we're appropriating $100,000 to offset some of the costs of the classroom renovations and bathroom renovations that we plan on doing. And then finally, the final reserve that we have is emergency reserve, which is at $250,000, and we do not plan on doing anything with that this current school year. I've talked often over the years about the need to break our reliance on the use of free balance and reduce the tax levy. Ideally, we shouldn't be appropriating anything from any of those reserves other than for anything from our surplus, unassigned reserves. Maintenance reserve, capital reserve, that's fine. You could use your reserves for how they're designated. Overuse of balances to reduce the tax levy can distort the actual needs of the district and the impact on the cap and impact on the cap. Educational programs and taxpayers in the futures might be impacted by that. There's a fine balance that needs to be maintained between the cap, the tax levy, and the use of reserves. So to review what we're using in our reserves this year, we're using unassigned free balance or surplus of $450,000, restricted maintenance reserve of $100,000, and restricted capital outlay of $150,000 for a total use of our reserves of $700,000. Final calculation I'd like to talk about this evening is the tax impact on the community and the households. The current expense and debt service tax increase is projected at $133.48 on a average home assessed at $183,400. That corresponds to an increase in the tax rate of 2.57%, which is more than what we did have last year, which was 1.33%. As I said, we had a lot of challenges this year. So tonight, this evening, you will be voting on the resolution to approve the use of bank cap, approve withdrawals from capital and maintenance reserves, set the maximum travel expenditure per statute for 2022-23, approve submission of the budget to the executive county superintendent for review, and it sets the tentative tax levy as described here below at $21,665,785 for general fund, $826,584 for the debt service fund, for a total tax levy to be raised of $22,492,369. So what's next? Tomorrow morning, if you guys approve this evening, I will press a button that will send the budget to the executive county superintendent, which is due on March 28th. Then between tomorrow and April 28th, when our public hearing is at 7:30, we will continue to review the budget and focus on efficiencies and savings and see what we can do. The public hearing will hopefully be in the board conference room, which is currently under renovation after it's been being used for the alternative program, which moved into their new spaces this week. So that's my presentation for this evening. If there's any questions? No? Okay, thank you.
So just, as Chair of the Finance and Facilities Committee, we spent a lot of nights, it seems like every week, going over this budget. Ryan, Greg, Bob, myself, we've always kept in mind that we have to make sure that we provide a proper education in a safe environment and still keep the taxpayers in mind. And I think we did that. A lot of material came our way. We had to review it, digest it. We asked Mr. Ganella and Mr. Arlington to make edits, and I think we did a good job bringing down this budget to where it stands right now. With that, I recommend, or the committee recommends, that we move this forward to the next phase, which is getting it to the county superintendent for the technical review. And that's all I have.
Well, next up is public comment.
I make a motion to open the meeting to the public for comment. Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. Is there a motion? Nancy?
Motion to close, seeing that there is no public present.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion was made by Mrs. Zimmerman, seconded by Mr. David. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, there is one resolution on this evening's agenda. So there's no need to exclude anything. So I will go right into it. Mr. Biner?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Habather?
Yes.
Jankowitz?
Yes.
Ladati?
Yes.
Tiers?
Yes.
Zimmerman?
Yes.
Panici? Motion carries. We don't need to close session, right? Okay, there's no closed session this evening, so,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Just also, we have till the 28th, or a few days before that, to make any edits. So if you think of anything or see anything you want to talk to myself or Vince or anybody on the committee about, let us know.
Find a bag of cash lying around.
Win your NCAA bracket.
Yeah. So,
when I heard that